In the fall of 1938, MGM Studios was chasing one of cinema history's most ambitious dreams. Elle Frank, Boehm's beloved fairy tale, The Wizard of Oz, would be brought to the silver screen as the most colorful, most magical, and most expensive project Hollywood had ever undertaken. Studio head Louis B. Mayer wanted this film to be not just a children's tale, but a demonstration of MGM's power and technical prowess. The budget had reached astronomical figures, nearly $3 million. For that era, this was equivalent to many studios' annual budgets. However, no one knew that behind this tale lay a production process so dark and dangerous it would nearly end in death. The bright lights of a colorful fairy tale concealed one of the most cursed, most chaotic, and most horrific sets in Hollywood history. This fairy tale was filled with technical impossibilities and decisions that endangered the cast's lives. And to this day, the filming of The Wizard of Oz is referred to as Hollywood's film that almost killed its actors. At the center of this curse was Judy Garland, then only 16 years old. But before we get to her story, the production was already in chaos. The first director, Richard Thorpe, was fired after just 2 weeks. His replacement, George Cukor, was moved to the Gone with the Wind project after only a few weeks. Finally, Victor Fleming was brought in, but he too had a nervous breakdown in the middle of production and left the set. The film went through 5 different directors. This many changes meant constant reshoots, scenes being filmed again, and actors having to repeat the same exhausting scenes over and over. Judy Garland, the systematic destruction of a star. At the heart of this curse was Judy Garland. Then, just 16 years old, MGM had actually wanted Shirley Temple for the lead role, but Temple's studio had refused the deal. Garland was the second choice, and the studio thought she wasn't good enough, so they decided to transform her. The studio wanted Garland to look younger than her actual age. The character of Dorothy was a 12-year-old child, while Garland was 16. For this, they forced her to work up to 18 hours a day. She would wake up at 4 a.m. and sit for makeup. Filming would go until 10 p.m., sometimes until midnight. To make her look thin and small, strict diets were enforced. She wasn't allowed to eat more than 500 calories a day. But the real scandal was the drugs. She was given amphetamine pills called pep pills to keep her energy levels high, stimulants in the morning, sedatives at night so she could sleep. MGM's systematic drug use was the beginning of an addiction cycle that would ruin the rest of Garland's life. Despite being just a child, MGM executives controlled every aspect of Garland's life. They decided what she could eat, how much she could sleep, who she could see, and even how she should behave off-set. Studio executives constantly told her she was fat, criticized her body, and systematically destroyed her self-confidence. Years later, in her memoirs, Garland would write, "They told me every day that I was worthless. They repeated that I could only sing, that I had no other qualities." The set atmosphere had turned into a nightmare for young Garland. The male actors didn't take her seriously, and some openly mocked her. Among the actors playing Dorothy's 3 friends, there were even those who called Garland "stupid little girl." Directors yelled at her, scolded her for not performing scenes well enough. The fact that Judy had completely lost control of her own life while playing a fairy tale heroine was one of the most telling signs of the film's dark spirit, the Tin Man disaster, the beginning of fatal cases. But what Garland experienced wasn't the only cursed aspect of this set. The real dangers began with the toxic materials and deadly makeup used to make the world of Oz look realistic. The film's famous Tin Man character was originally played by Buddy Ebsen, was an experienced dancer and actor, perfectly cast for the role. However, the aluminum powder, yes, real aluminum powder used in the Tin Man costume filled Ebsen's lungs. The makeup department was applying pure aluminum powder to Ebsen's face and body, using an airbrush method. To create the metallic appearance, the powder particles entered his lungs with every breath. In the first week, Ebsen felt only slight discomfort, chest pressure, occasional coughing, but complaining on an MGM set was a sign of weakness. He continued. By the second week, shortness of breath began. By the end of the third week, he couldn't get out of bed at home. He had started having difficulty breathing. Chemical burns had formed in his lungs. One day, he was so breathless he couldn't come to set and had to call an ambulance. Doctors said he had come face to face with death. His lungs were permanently damaged. Ebsen lay in the hospital for weeks. Doctors told him he would never be able to breathe at the same capacity again. And MGM? They made no statement. The press was told Ebsen fell ill. That's all. While Ebsen was in the hospital, the studio hired another actor for the role, Jack Haley. In other words, Even an actor nearly dying wasn't enough reason for MGM to stop production. For Haley, the costume was made somewhat safer. This time, instead of aluminum powder, a paste-like mixture was used. But the material was the same and still toxic. Haley was lucky. His lungs weren't affected. However, his eyes were seriously damaged. When he sweated inside the costume for hours, the makeup would run into his eyes. Serious eye infections developed. Haley had to undergo treatment for months, and the studio covered this up too, because this film had to look perfect. But what looked perfect was actually a deadly trap. The witch's fire, Margaret Hamilton's nightmare, and then came the witch costume disaster. The film's Wicked Witch was played by experienced stage actress Margaret Hamilton. Hamilton took her role seriously, perfectly reflecting the character's malevolence. But the price would be heavy. A copper-based toxic paint was applied to her skin to create the green complexion. The paint was so toxic, it penetrated Hamilton's skin, seeping through her pores. It was so poisonous that Hamilton couldn't even eat on set. If the paint touched her mouth, there was a risk of serious poisoning. Every meal required her to first clean the paint from her face, eat, and then be painted again for hours. But the real danger emerged during the fire scene. In the scene, the witch character arrives in Munchkinland, threatens Dorothy and her friends, then disappears through a trapdoor amid smoke and flames. The scene was literally full of pyrotechnics. Hamilton said during rehearsal that the mechanism was dangerous, but the director said, "Don't worry, everything's under control." When the cameras rolled, everything went wrong. The mechanism malfunctioned, and Hamilton couldn't descend into the trapdoor in time. The flame effects went off right on schedule, but Hamilton was still on top. The flames came directly at her. Her costume, especially the broom and cape, caught fire. Hamilton's face and hands were engulfed in flames. She was screaming, running around the set in panic. Finally, someone brought a fire extinguisher. But the damage was horrific. Hamilton's face and hands were severely burned. Worse still, the copper-based paint on her face had stuck to her skin, creating a toxic layer under the burns. When she was taken to the hospital, doctors first had to clean the paint, then treat the burns. They struggled for hours to save her skin. Hamilton spent 6 weeks in the hospital. The incredible thing is that when she returned to set after recovering, MGM told her to be more careful, as if the accident was her fault. Years later, in an interview, Hamilton would say, "I had never experienced such pain in my life. I had nightmares at night. I trembled whenever I remembered the fire." But the studio just asked, "When can you come back?" Stunt accidents, Betty Danko's tragic fate. For Hamilton's particularly dangerous scenes, especially the flying scenes, a stunt double was used. These scenes were performed by Betty Danko. Danko was a professional stunt performer who had successfully completed many dangerous scenes throughout her career. But the Wizard of Oz's set was dangerous on a whole different level. The flying broom used in the witch's flying scenes was actually a complex system of wires and pyrotechnics. While Danko was suspended in the air, smoke and fire effects would be set off from below and around her. The scene had been tested several times and had been successful. But during the actual shoot, the pyrotechnic device went out of control. The explosion occurred directly beneath Danko. Fire and metal fragments scattered in all directions. Danko was seriously injured in this explosion. Her legs suffered second and third degree burns. When she fell to the ground, she was unconscious. An ambulance was called, and Danko was rushed to the hospital. Permanent scars remained on her legs, and she underwent treatment for months. The studio remained silent again. The press release stated only a minor set accident. Danko's name wasn't even mentioned. Due to the almost obsessive devotion given to this film, worker safety was constantly neglected. MGM's logic was simple. The film was more important than anything, including human life, Munchkins, and set chaos. Another chaotic area was the set with the Munchkin actors. 124 dwarf actors were hired for the film. Most came from vaudeville stages, circuses, or other productions. For MGM, this was a major logistical challenge. The studio kept the Munchkin actors under quarantine in special hotels. The official explanation was protecting the actors. But the real reason was different. MGM was afraid they would cause trouble when in groups and attract the press's attention. In Hollywood of that era, dwarf actors were frequently demeaned, belittled, and viewed as uncontrollable, according to rumors. Some Munchkin actors had consumed alcohol on set. Fights had broken out, and some scenes had even been sabotaged. One rumor claimed that during the filming of Munchkin scenes, an actor could be seen hanging himself in the background. This myth persisted for years. But the truth was quite different. What appeared in the background was actually a bird, a flamingo. But the fact that the rumor survived so long showed how chaotic and out of control the set appeared. Hollywood reporters of that era had written, "There are uncontrollable little people on the Oz set." The studio denied its accuracy. But it's known that this part of the production was truly chaotic. Some of the actors claimed they didn't receive their salaries. Some complained about poor conditions. And MGM continued to suppress everything. The lion costume, Burt Lahr's torture. The costumes used in the film were a nightmare in themselves. One of the worst was the Cowardly Lion's costume. The costume was made from real lion skin and weighed more than 90 pounds. The inside was lined with synthetic fur and padding material. Actor Burt Lahr would be drenched in sweat between scenes, struggling to breathe. When the camera stopped, the inside of the costume would be completely soaked, as if filled with water. Under the studio lights, the temperature inside the costume exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Lahr came to the brink of fainting multiple times during filming. In one scene, Lahr passed out. The set doctor intervened. Lahr was given oxygen. After resting a bit, the director asked him, "Can you continue?" Lahr nodded, because saying no was career suicide at the studio. He put the costume back on and continued filming. The film had to go on, because MGM was after perfection, and actor health was seen as just a minor obstacle. Years later, Lahr would say, "Every time I put on that costume, I felt death. I couldn't breathe. My field of vision was limited. I couldn't move. And every day, I had to stay inside that thing for 6 hours. Technical hell, lights, makeup, and endless scenes." The hot studio lights made the costumes even heavier. The Technicolor camera system used at the time required an incredible amount of light. The lights were so powerful that in some scenes the temperature exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Actors would sweat, makeup would run, and they had to be repainted over and over. The Tin Man's makeup, the witch's green paint, the lion's facial coverings were reapplied for each scene. And this process sometimes took 6 hours. Actors would start makeup at 4 a.m. After makeup was finished, costumes would be put on. By the time filming started, they were already tired and exhausted. The magical world concept actually relied on a torture-filled preparation process that physically wore down the workers. The yellow brick road was not actually made of stone, but of painted wood and plastic. However, under harsh studio lights, the paint emitted toxic fumes. The artificial snow used for the poppy field scene contained asbestos. Yes, asbestos, a substance now known to be carcinogenic. Actors played in this snow. It was sprinkled on them. They breathed it in. The film was released in 1939 and achieved tremendous success. Critics praised it. Audiences loved it. The song "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" became a classic. The Wizard of Oz became one of cinema history's most iconic films. But what was the cost? Judy Garland suffered great psychological damage from this process. Studio pressure, drugs, excessive working hours, and emotional manipulation were the beginning of addiction problems that would last for years. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, she struggled with alcohol and drug addiction. Her marriages failed. Her career fluctuated. In 1969, at only 47 years old, she died from a drug overdose. Many people say the real cause of her death began on the Wizard of Oz set. Buddy Ebsen, fired from the Tin Man role, lived with respiratory problems for the rest of his life. His lungs never worked at full capacity again. He continued his career, but with every breath he took, he remembered that toxic aluminum powder. Margaret Hamilton bore scars from facial and hand burns. Small, permanent marks remained on her face for life. For years, she was afraid of fire, couldn't even light a candle. But what hurt most was MGM's attitude toward her. She received no apology, no compensation, no support. Stunt double Betty Danko never fully recovered from the burns on her legs. Her stunt career ended. She had difficulty walking. MGM paid her a small settlement and forgot about her. The Wizard of Oz may be one of the world's most beloved films today, but this tale's magic was created at a dark cost. Behind the colorful world were deadly makeup, toxic chemicals, burned costumes, exploding scenes, and a studio system that consumed young actors' lives. Hollywood's golden age, as that era is called, was actually a period when actors and crew members were sacrificed. Studios were gods. People were just material. The Wizard of Oz is the most painful example of this. Sometimes a film's magic is born from a nightmare. And The Wizard of Oz is perhaps Hollywood's most magical but most cursed nightmare. Beneath the yellow brick road lie blood, sweat, tears, and permanent scars. When The Wizard of Oz's curtain is pulled back, a real nightmare is revealed.